Welcome to A Little Bit Radical, a business podcast from Standing on Giants. I'm Rob, your host. Join me as I meet people and organisations who are doing things differently, challenging the status quo and, yes, might just be a little bit radical. How did you sleep last night? Would you like to sleep better? Chances are you've answered that question with a resounding yes. Poor sleep is often held up as one of the most dangerous long-term health risks facing us today. Depending on whose data you go on, between a third and half of us are not getting the right amount or quality of sleep we need. My guest today is taking a unique approach to this problem. Kaveh Memari is the founder of Sofi Health. Sofi uses a blend of ancient and modern medicine to improve your sleep and state of calm through the power of plants, delivered in a tailor-made spray. Let's find out more. Kaveh, welcome to the podcast.
Rob, it's a pleasure to be here.
So, Kaveh, if you are a little bit radical and you're on our podcast, so we know you are, when in your early life set you up for that?
I think it was probably my continuous changing of countries. I think a combination of having been in 10 different schools in 4 different countries in the first 9 years of schooling. I think that helped a lot in not taking root in any one idea or any one place or any one culture. And I think if you look at even what Sofi is all about, which is combining plants and plant medicine, which is one of our oldest ideas with, say, the latest thinking in machine learning, it is very much about bridging the knowledge that hides at the boundaries of these different ideas, these different cultures, these different methods. So I would say being a nomad definitely helped.
That's really interesting. 10 schools in 9 years. That must have been quite disruptive. Which countries were you living in and what kind of things did you learn from them?
Yeah, so I was born in the States and we moved very quickly. My bloodlines are Iranian, so by birth American, by choice Canadian, and by residence Londoner. And I've been here for 23 years. And I would say that probably what I learned was an ability to pick up ideas, pick up cultures, languages, and make friends fast. I think that's probably a very useful skill set in life.
How to make friends and influence people, right?
You know, the influencing hopefully comes from the mission. And if you find that you go on a mission that has a real human legacy effect, it's incredible how you can share the Kool-Aid around. In our case, we were looking, as you spoke about earlier, very much at these 2 things, which were pandemics, pre-pandemic, sleep and stress. And if you aren't affected by it, you probably know someone in your family that is. And the idea that we could do something without the tolerance, dependence, and addiction that we're also very concerned about when it comes to modern medicine, well, that resonates with a lot of people.
Thank you for sharing that, Kaveh. As you become an adult, do you find yourself becoming more radical or less radical? And what do you think's been behind that?
I hope I'll never become an adult because I think something would have died in me if I do. And I think my kids would attest to that. So may I never be an adult. I say we don't work, we play. I think the idea of having the privilege of combining ideas that you have never thought about or heard about or even accepted before in new ways is a great privilege to dedicate your life and be a heretic and be a rebel from time to time. And sometimes you do it because you feel the need for rebellion, but sometimes you do it because you feel that the status quo just isn't good enough. And that usually is a pretty good motivation for innovation. They say it's necessity is the mother of all invention. So
I'm interested in what you said about never becoming an adult and that we don't work, we play. How do you bring that to life as you are now the founder of a company with, a team of people collaborating with you? How do you inspire your team to embrace that ethos?
It's amazing. Because we've never had a lot of resource to do what we do, we've never had multiple layers of people covering other people who have similar skill sets. Everyone in our team of 40-odd creators and makers and scientists and inventors is a one-off, which means that the project will be defined by them, by each of them. Everyone runs part of the gauntlet that makes Sofi real. And if any one person isn't there, the whole project doesn't go forward, which is exceptional, but it means that everyone has an ownership not just by equity, not just options and shares. And of course we do. We have a structure that absolutely baffles VCs, which is we have 8 founding shareholders and 31 founding option holders. They cannot think of a worst idea, and they are right. I am either naive or nice, hopefully more of one than the other. But if you can make a shared vision, if everyone believes they have an ownership stake, if they believe their gift, whatever that is necessary to the overall success and mission, you will find that the sense of purpose is much bigger than any paycheck, bigger than any LinkedIn entry, bigger than any kind of an event you could go around and try to see how many hands you can shake at. It's something that you wear. It's like a jumper. It's real. And I think we've been so privileged just to find those kinds of folks around Sofi, and they've allowed to make it real. And of course, the sense of our team really grew from our core first makers to our what we call our pioneers, who are the alpha testers who allowed us and gave us the permission to iterate fast, be super patient, break things with them, and build a better version of what we are launching imminently. So our idea of team actually grew from, if you would, shareholders to stakeholders in Sofi, and we are very grateful for them. So it's all about alignment at the end of the day.
That's quite a unique approach. I think I'm going to have to come back to that unique business structure and certainly the investment structure of the business. But let's move into the work and start at the beginning now. So what is Sofi? What is the product? And what's been the story so far?
Yeah, so, plants have been the basis of much of our medicine. Half of our prescribed medication stems from the earth. So what we're doing, and yet our knowledge of plants is about 1%. And plants have been around just as long as we have, as mammals, 25 million years. So we have this incredible, intimate history with plants. But somehow in the last 150 years, we were disconnected. What we saw was this incredible pandemic. I don't wish to use that word, but we saw sleep and stress effectively being raging through much of our societies. And we saw that we had these incredible ways of addressing these concerns in the past, and they were good for chronic conditions. But increasingly, we got prescribed acute solutions to them, and we saw a lot of problems. We saw people being concerned about the risk of tolerance and addiction. And we thought, well, what if we could not just say valerian or passiflora or ashwagandha help some people sleep some of the time? What if we could discover the one that specifically works for Rob? What if we could tell Rob passiflora never helps him sleep, but valerian helps him sleep 82 minutes at a 98.3% level of confidence? That would be a discovery that would be pretty near impossible for Rob to make with any existing product and any existing service. And why does Rob care? Not particularly what the percentage is or what the plant is. He just wants to sleep. He just wants to feel better. And if he could do that naturally using plants and a bit of technology, oh, what an amazing legacy.
Okay, so that sounds like the crux of Sofi, where you are finding a personalized blend for each of your pioneers, as you call them, each of your customers. How do you go about doing that, making that real?
So I think the first step, I should say, in personalization isn't so much to create an individual SKU for every single consumer, because that's just impossible. You would need 8 billion different products, and that's not scalable. I would say the first step in true personalization is understanding the unique response to a standard stimulus. So when we did our first global pilot with valerian in 2022, we had 300 pioneers in nearly 14 countries. And that was a wonderful logistic operation post-pandemic, both in making a physical product, a digital product, and also getting it to folks, or pioneers as we call them. And what we had to do was we basically had to establish what was the normal for each individual. How did they change as they took the plant? And how did they change after they ran out of the plant? And so we built a journaling mechanism through an app where pioneers would begin to journal and become quite self-aware of either how they felt or slept. And we asked them to continue to journal as they started to deliver valerian. Now, the stimulus, in this case, a plant medicine with a huge amount of human history, valerian, valeriana, there's a beautiful Latin name to go with it. Huge history of addressing GABA, of addressing specific pathways of sleeplessness. What was amazing was we delivered one standard plant, but we were able to observe 300 unique responses to it. And in the same way that, I guess if I use an analogy, the way that Spotify builds a technology layer around the listener, rather than put the artist in the middle, put the listener in the middle and put a technology layer around the listener and allow them to determine what great music is. Sofi built a technology layer around our pioneers and allowed them to let us know which were the plants that over time were beginning to genuinely affect their baseline. So we weren't saying that valerian or passiflora or ashwagandha, these plants have randomized controlled trials for effect. We know they work some of the time for some people. But what we wanted to see was how personal was the response to the standard stimulus. Because our personal responses could determine whether that is the right pathway. And in sleeplessness, there's 9, and in anxiety, there's 4, and 2 of them are shared. So there are 11 different things going on, and you cannot and I cannot differentiate which one of those is the one that might make a difference for us. And each one of these plants targets 1 or 2 of these pathways. So what Sofi allowed us to do for the first time was deliver a standard stimulus. So it wasn't about creating 8 billion SKUs, but it was about listening to 8 billion responses to a standard SKU. That is the first step of personalization. And that is the step we took with our first global pilot, which was valerian, our second global pilot, passiflora. And then we started to map these pioneers and saw how they had extremely unique responses to each of these plants and how some responded to one and not the other. This kind of self-trial we do every day when we Google valerian, read 20 million hits, go to Holland and Barrett, pick up a bottle that has a plant that we think is valerian, no idea what's in it, take it for some time, don't know what it does, our doctor doesn't want to talk to us about it, maybe we'll find a Facebook community, and eventually it expires in the back of a medicine cabinet. We think that's a poor user experience. And so that's what Sofi set out to change. And the results were staggering.
Well, you've teed that up. Tell us about the results from your pioneers.
I remember, our chief medical officer, Professor Kassere, he's amazing. He's been my moral North Pole, my compass on this project. And I remember when we first saw the signals coming from the S1 Pioneer program, our first study with valerian, I called him up. He teaches at Duke. He was doing a shift at the hospital. And I showed him the aggregate view first. And it took us a while to build the aggregate view because we had pioneers all around the world. So we had to time adjust them to the moment when they each did their first spray. Some had baseline for over 100 days. So we had a lot of data. And what was sure enough, we could see an improvement within 10 days across what we called the herd, which was the group. And 25, 30 days, which was how long our trial was, we were delivering 3 10 ml plant capsules. We started to see a slow decline in the quality of sleep. But what was super interesting was the baseline after a month of intervention is a big word, after a month of using valerian, was higher for the average than was before they started. And the problem we had was, we have this community we call the treehouse. And about 25 days in, we started to get these sad faces in the treehouse. And we thought, what's going on now? And the pioneers said, am I going back to no sleep? For us, that was a shocker because we were so preoccupied with making the technology work. It hadn't occurred to us, what if we actually impacted a human being's ability to sleep? We hadn't worked that out. And I remember we had about 150 capsules left. We had shipped out about 1,000. Who did we give these to? So we asked Sofi. And we use she for Sofi. So we asked Sofi because we were like, well, let Sofi decide. Of all of these pioneers, who should get these? And we supplied only a handful of pioneers with refills. And their baseline was so much higher than the whole group. And it was incredible because we could not only, for the first time, capture the impact of plants, which we've known for thousands of years. We know they work. We just didn't have the mathematics to prove it. But we could begin to discern between the people who were responding and the people who weren't. And I remember I showed this to David, to Professor Kassere, and he said 2 things to me I'll never forget. He said, you know what? I just came off the ward and I prescribed Ambien to some of my patients. As far as I know, it might help some of them fall asleep 15 minutes earlier. And I don't have data of effect like this. The second thing he said off the cuff, he said, do you have any idea how different the practice of medicine would be if we stopped prescribing patients the wrong medication? And I have to say, Sofi is a consumer platform. We have a ton of doctors, a ton of scientists who want to make sure Sofi is never about snake oil. But it was incredible to see a clinician, a professor of medicine, someone acknowledge the power of these herbs delivered through a personalized engine. And for us, we felt we had a mission and a cause.
How fascinating. I'm almost speechless at that story, Kaveh. There's a lot that I want to continue digging into. The first, which is very interesting, you mentioned your chief medical officer as your moral guide and this moral dilemma that you were presented with, which is that you were running out of product for the people who wanted it. How do you look at the potential implications and maybe even risks of what you're doing in that your customers develop a dependency on your products, much like in the standard pharmaceutical industry?
You know, what's incredible is we have a wonderful medical herbalist, Pamela, who actually is in clinic, and she treats her patients every day with plants, and she has a long history of that. And we also work with scientific partners like the Royal Botanic Garden Kew, and we have read most of the peer-reviewed publications on plants. And from what we can read, there is very limited opportunity for the development of the same kind of tolerance, dependence, and addiction that we see with synthesized single chemicals, which is what we deliver in purified pharmaceuticals, than it is with plants, because plants don't just hit one receptor continuously. They deliver a whole bouquet of stuff, and they hit that receptor. And they seem to have this kind of effect, at least from the studies that we have run. And, you know, I'm not indoctrinated, so I just look at the data that's coming from our 4 global pilots. It's a bit like, I don't know what to describe it to, as some kind of allergy desensitization, where in theory you can then take the allergen away and the body has a natural ability to no longer overreact to pollen. With these plants, there seems to be an incredible ability to actually take the plant away, and the person's baseline is actually higher than it was before. So we don't see the signs of crashing, we don't see the signs of dependence, and perhaps one of the gifts of the entire Sofi platform is that for the first time we have the one-on-one connection with a pioneer, where if there was ever a chance of that, we would actually see it in the data. And in the very simplest way, you would see more presses on the Sofi pod and lower responses in terms of effect over time. And if that is ever observed within the Sofi brain, she can very easily switch you to a different plant. It's actually less about addiction and it's more about tolerance. And it's all about how you maintain an effective regimen for making you feel better or sleep better. So if you would, right now we are prescribing and taking over-the-counter and other products with no seatbelt. We do not know how this product is impacting us as we take it over time, other than our ability for self-recall. And mine is horrendous. I mean, I barely know how many hours I slept 2 nights ago, much more how I imperceivably changed over 6 weeks. So I would say that even when it comes to prescribed medication, perhaps not Sofi Health, but someday Sofi Medical may have a response to help us avoid the kinds of things that you see in Netflix.
How scalable is this? This must be a question that you're faced with on a daily basis, and you're having conversations about production and scaling and the investment and all of that.
That's a super important question, and it's what we've spent most of the first half of 2023 focusing on. So if 2022 for us was about proving that the technology fundamentally make personalized discoveries, and we ran the Valerian and the Passiflora Study 1 and Study 2, S1 and S2 as we call them, and we proved that you can make those observations at the individual level. This year has been purely about building significant scale, significant capacity for volume, because we believe there is an opportunity to do something deeply different than either complementary health as it exists today or pharmaceutical as they exist today. And for us, that meant we had to dual source our plants. We had to tool our own glass bottle. We had to reduce the number of folds in our refill pack from taking minutes and 53 seconds to 32 seconds. and about another 17 different things we've done this year, which have allowed us to make Sofi accessible. And our thinking is that we want to see Sofi as accessible to as many people as possible. One of the questions we've recently had is, how do you price it? What are we cheaper or more expensive to? Because the only thing we look around is personalized vitamins. They're not really personalized. There's a type form questionnaire, and then you get the same old vitamins. Do you actually get a daily effect or a weekly effect? Do you track? Do you journal? Do you see consumption? Not really. So we don't really have a peer in that sense. And we thought, actually, we want to go cost plus on pricing because we want to get this in the hands of as many people as possible. And our mission is simple. We want to get to 1 million folks served and subscribed to Sofi with better sleep and calm as quickly as possible. It's a bit of a function of capital and a bit of a function of success, but certainly our moonshot is to get there in advance before 2028. So that is our direction of travel.
Well, good luck.
We'll do that.
All we can say. The type of business you're in, the way that you've set up your business with, remind me, was it 8 founding equity partners?
8 founding shareholders.
31 founding option holders. The whole approach you're taking a plant that's grown for thousands of years, not synthesizing a chemical and patenting it. You must be told a lot that you're crazy and that this will never work, right? How do you view your resilience and your belief in the way you motivate yourself to keep going in the face of what must be quite a lot of adversity, I'd imagine?
I guess as a starting point, either I'm a terrible listener or I'm bad at crowdsourcing my belief systems. So you have a vision about what this is. And the moment you get one person, just one person, telling you this changed their life, you think you've done something incredible. And I tell you, you don't need to change the world, just change one person's life. And then you see a second person's life and a third person. So you think, okay, I don't mind that the VCs who do consumer have never done tech. And I don't mind that VCs who have never done tech understand consumers. Who cares? Who cares what their playbook is? You just need to find the right capital structure, and it might not be easy, and it's not been easy, but you're motivated by that shared vision that this team, which began with founding shareholders, expanded to founding option holders, expanded to pioneers, and you're motivated by them and you understand what it is that you're building and you stay true to the vision of what you're building. And in time, every no gets you one closer to a yes. So you look forward every day. It doesn't really matter what the outcome is because you know why you're building it. You know why you're there and you know what the impact of this project can be. It's an idea like that is incredibly infectious. And I don't wish to use that word because of what we've all recently experienced, but it is powerful. It is more loyalty than a paycheck. It is more loyalty than a job or a title. It is a cause. And if you can make your project a cause that also has the opportunity to not do well, but do good, you can not only make a profit, but you can actually profit by people improving their quality of life. That's incredible and rare. So people get motivated by that. So you can disregard the yays or nays along the way.
Excellent. Perhaps a challenging question for you now, Kaveh, and I wouldn't be doing my job and you a service if I didn't ask a couple of challenging questions. So the Sofi platform is built largely around data, and there's a lot of health tech companies emerging who are giving us more and more data about ourselves. But is there also a risk of kind of micromanaging our health and having too much data, feeling overloaded, overwhelmed, and that there's a slight risk that in having that much data about our health and about ourselves, that it could actually fuel the very anxiety that we're trying to prevent? How do you look at that problem?
You know, I look at that like I look at all technology. I don't think it inherently is good or bad. I think it's what we do with it. So do you build a nuclear power plant, or do you carry the curse of Oppenheimer with you everywhere you go? Do you build an intervention that helps millions of children live longer, or do you build a biological, chemical, nuclear device with it? The technology or the knowledge or the science implicit in our individual responses in plants is a force for good. But of course, you could then use that to build terrible things perhaps with it if you are a nefarious actor. So I think it comes down with the way we use technology in the same way we use a pen. What do you write with it? Do you write something that inspires people or creates hate? It's not the pen's fault. It's not the data that is good or bad. It's what you choose to do with the data and what is its purpose. If it creates anxiety and tracker mentality with no intervention, then you have to really question yourself. Do you really need to know you had 29 minutes of REM sleep? So what? What are you going to do about it? And it's one of the things that we found really interesting. And that's where we saw Sofi creating this iOS of wellness is a really big idea, but we saw rescue remedy and botanicals. We saw connected wearables. We saw wellness, beautiful digital immersive apps. And we saw no platform that connected all of these. And everyone was kind of left to self-experimentation to try to make sense what their REM sleep meant. Maybe you should try to sleep more tonight. You're like, okay, I'll try, So for us, again, you're right. Data without an action is like having the world's greatest intelligence organization and not having the means to do anything about it. Painful. What are you going to do about that? And that's what we loved about Sofi, was because for the first time we could actually provide an over-the-counter plant-based, totally herb, totally natural, totally safe, that you could do something with that 29 minutes of REM sleep from your Aura Ring. And for us, when you can take data and have an actionable outcome that improves the quality of life, that feels a bit less like an Oppenheimer outcome.
I'd say so. I think I'm inclined to agree with you, Kaveh. As much as I've got a small percentage of the healthy skepticism, but I think you would say to me, try it, right?
It's entirely healthy to maintain it.
Absolutely. So, Kaveh, I'm going to try and bring you out of your day-to-day now, which I think might be a struggle as a startup founder trying to grow fast to 1 million members across the world, 1 million pioneers. And also you're tackling a big issue. But I always like to ask guests that what's a little bit radical change that you would like to see in the world that maybe you don't influence on a day-to-day basis? What would that thing be for you?
Something small?
It could be small, yeah.
How about an ability to disagree without being disagreeable?
Love that.
How about the ability to accept multiple perceptions of reality without having to enforce our own? How about the fact that we look at Sofi and we have a clinician and an ethnobotanist, a medical herbalist and a biochemist, and we actually don't view them fundamentally having a religious debate about to be or not to be, which is such an easy way to, is it modern medicine or is it plant stuff? Because it can't be both. And actually you think, why not? If I'm having a heart attack, please don't give me valerian. Rush me to the hospital and give me an immediate intervention. It's about an ability to understand that different perceptions are useful at different times. And I think if we could grow more tolerance of a plurality of thinking, I think we might benefit. Small change, but we can hope.
Just a small change. Yeah. I'm fully on board with that, Kaveh. And I'm thinking around issues of health.
Yeah.
Such a divisive issue. And you do get people who are, zealots, for want of a better word, about their particular viewpoint. I'm 2 years into being a father for the first time. You're a father too.
Yeah.
Thank you. I remember all of that stuff around how to give birth, and the kind of various judgments in the different types of birth. And then when you get into actually how to be a parent, all the different ways, this way is right, this is wrong.
Yeah.
And that's just one small example. I'm sure that we can think of thousands and thousands of examples.
For sure.
Yeah, I think disagreeing agreeably, to quote Alistair Campbell and Rory Stewart for their podcast, The Rest is Politics, would be a great change. Would be a great change. Well, Kaveh, we're coming to the end of our time now, and so I always ask the same question. You've actually given some wonderful advice.
If you can think of it as advice, please use it at own peril. I've quite got the experience yet to give advice, but go on. What are you thinking?
Well, good caveat for what's about to come then, listeners. we always ask our guests the same question at the end, which is if there's someone listening to this podcast and they have a little bit of a radical idea for a business, for their personal life, whatever it might be, for their health maybe in this case, but they're struggling to get off the ground, what would you say to them?
Don't wait. Ideas don't mature into a fine wine. They get lost. And don't wait. Without fail, what you do isn't going to be good, but don't wait. Because until you do it, you won't understand the many blind spots that make your idea absolutely terrible. But in the process of discovering all those things you didn't see, you will glimpse into something that could just change your life and the life of people around you. And allow yourself to go on that journey, knowing full well that the destination is nothing going to be similar to what you thought it's going to be. But allow yourself the discovery and give yourself the space to make that journey, because it probably is the most significant thing you'll do.
I think that is going straight into the top 5 favorite quotes from this podcast. Ideas do not mature like a fine wine. They get lost. Well, that's wonderful and very, very insightful. Thank you, Kaveh. It's been wonderful to talk to you today. Thank you so much for sharing more about your journey with Sofi and the change that you're trying to make in the world with Sofi. Really appreciate it. And I hope you've enjoyed yourself.
Absolutely, Rob. And extremely grateful to you and the team, firstly, giving your time to listen to what we're working on. But I think the one takeaway I want you to have from what we've done at Sofi is Sofi is not about me. Sofi is about an incredibly talented group of people who came together from a range of disciplines whose lives would never have intersected had they stayed in their specific tram lines. An ethnobotanist and industrial designer would have never exchanged ideas, living in the forest or living behind a foam board. And I think it's so cool when you mix ideas across different disciplines. And I would say it's such a gift, and I would encourage more of that wherever and whenever you can. And thank you so much for giving us an opportunity to share our story.
I think that's a wonderful closing remark. Thank you, Kaveh. See you again soon. Thank you for listening to this podcast. If you enjoyed it, please follow us on your podcast platform. If you'd like to appear on A Little Bit Radical or have an idea of someone we should speak to, please email podcast@standingongiants.com or get in touch with me on LinkedIn. You can search Rob Fawkes or search Standing on Giants and you'll find me there. Thank you very much and speak to you next time.